It was a cold, gray morning in the small Midwest town of Mapplewood. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows on the runway as Flight 472 touched down with a soft thud. Passengers began to shuffle out of the plane, some stretching their stiff limbs after the long journey, others clutching their bags tightly and hurrying toward the terminal. Among them was Judge Marcus Holloway, a man whose presence commanded respect even in the most ordinary settings. Judge Holloway was no stranger to attention. At 54 years old, he had spent decades serving as a judge in Chicago's criminal court system. Known for his sharp mind, fairness, and unshakable moral compass, he had earned the trust of colleagues and citizens alike. But today, he wasn't here to preside over cases or make rulings. He had traveled to Mapplewood to deliver a keynote speech at a legal conference focused on systemic racism within law enforcement, a topic close to his heart. Dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, polished leather shoes, and a neatly knotted tie, Judge Holloway looked every bit the distinguished figure he was. His suitcase rolled smoothly behind him as he stepped off the plane, his expression calm and composed. He didn't notice the stares from fellow passengers, some admiring, others indifferent, but he did feel the chill in the air as he walked through the jet bridge into the terminal. The airport was quiet, almost eerily so. A few families waited by the baggage claim, while airport staff bustled about doing their jobs. Judge Holloway glanced around briefly, taking in the modest surroundings. This wasn't O'Hare International Airport back home. This was a tiny regional hub where everyone seemed to know each other. For a moment, he felt out of place, not because of who he was, but because of where he was. As he approached the exit checkpoint, two men in police uniforms caught his eye. They stood near the security desk, speaking quietly to one another. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his face stern and unreadable. The other was shorter, with a wiry frame and restless eyes that darted around the room. Neither looked particularly friendly. At first, Judge Holloway thought nothing of it. Police officers were often stationed at airports for routine patrols. It was normal, but then something strange happened. The taller officer turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Judge Holloway. There was no smile, no nod of acknowledgement, just a hard, calculating stare that sent an uneasy ripple down the judge's spine. "Sir," the officer barked suddenly, stepping forward with authority. "Can I see your ID?" Judge Holloway froze mid-step, his hand still gripping the handle of his suitcase. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Excuse me," he asked politely, his voice steady despite the sudden tension in the air. "I said, can I see your ID?" The officer repeated, louder this time. His partner moved closer, positioning himself just behind Judge Holloway as though anticipating trouble. For a split second, Judge Holloway considered arguing. After all, he hadn't done anything wrong, but experience had taught him that cooperation was often the best approach in situations like this. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his wallet and flipped it open to reveal his identification card. A clear photo of himself alongside his title, Honorable Marcus Holloway, Circuit Court Judge *. "I'm a sitting judge," he said firmly, holding up the card for both officers to see. "Is there a problem here?" Instead of backing off, the officers exchanged a glance. The taller one snatched the wallet from Judge Holloway's hand, examining it closely. "Yeah, okay," he muttered sarcastically. "And I'm the mayor of this town." His partner smirked, clearly amused by the comment. Meanwhile, Judge Holloway felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. Was this really happening? Here he was, a respected public servant, being treated like a common criminal, all because of the color of his skin. Before he could say another word, the taller officer grabbed his arm roughly and spun him around. "Put your hands behind your back," he ordered, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "What is going on?" Judge Holloway demanded, his voice rising now. "This is unacceptable." But the officers weren't listening. Within moments, cold metal clamped around his wrists, and he found himself standing in the middle of the terminal, surrounded by shocked onlookers. Some people stared in disbelief, while others quickly whipped out their phones to record the scene. Whispers filled the air as Judge Holloway tried, and failed, to keep his composure. In that moment, he realized two things. First, this arrest was not about justice, it was about prejudice. And second, this humiliating incident would not end quietly. Little did he know, his name would soon be splashed across headlines nationwide, sparking outrage and igniting a movement for change. The tension in the Mapplewood airport terminal was palpable. Judge Marcus Holloway stood handcuffed, his polished suit now a symbol of irony rather than dignity. The two officers who had detained him showed no signs of backing down, their expressions hardened and dismissive. One clutched Judge Holloway's ID card loosely in his hand, barely glancing at it as though it meant nothing. "This is absurd," Judge Holloway said, his voice firm but calm. "I've already shown you my credentials. Do you understand what this means? I'm a sitting judge." But the taller officer simply shrugged, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Yeah, okay, Judge, and I'm sure you've." Passengers nearby began to murmur among themselves. Some looked away, uncomfortable witnessing the scene unfold. Others watched intently, their faces reflecting shock and disbelief. A young mother holding her child whispered to her husband, "Is that really happening? He says he's a judge." One man, a businessman in a tailored coat, stepped forward cautiously. "Officers," he said, trying to sound neutral, "can you explain why this gentleman is being arrested? He doesn't seem like a threat." The shorter officer shot him a glare. "This is police business, sir. Please step back." The man hesitated for a moment before retreating, clearly intimidated. Meanwhile, a college student named Lisa quietly pulled out her phone and started recording. She zoomed in on Judge Holloway's face, capturing his composed yet defiant expression. Then she panned to the officers, whose body language screamed authority, but also something darker: arrogance. As the video rolled, Judge Holloway spoke directly to the officers, his voice steady despite the humiliation. "You're making a mistake," he said firmly. "People are watching. This isn't going to end well for you." His words didn't faze them. They led him toward the exit, ignoring the whispers and stares from bystanders. Outside, a police cruiser waited, its flashing lights casting eerie shadows on the pavement. Judge Holloway was placed in the back seat, the door slamming shut behind him with a finality that made his heart sink. Inside the car, he sat upright, refusing to let despair take hold. He replayed the events in his mind, analyzing every detail. Why had they targeted him? Was it because of his race, or was it simply an abuse of power? Whatever the reason, he knew this wasn't just about him. It was about exposing the cracks in a system that allowed such injustices to happen. Back at the terminal, Lisa uploaded the video she had recorded to social media. Within minutes, it went viral. People across the country watched in outrage as the footage showed Judge Holloway being treated like a criminal. Comments poured in, condemning the officer's actions and calling for accountability. Hashtags like #JusticeForHolloway and #EndRacial Profiling began trending nationwide. News outlets picked up the story quickly. By evening, major networks were reporting on the incident, highlighting Judge Holloway's distinguished career and questioning why someone of his stature would be targeted. Legal experts weighed in, pointing out the lack of probable cause for the arrest. Civil rights organizations issued statements demanding answers, vowing to support Judge Holloway in any way they could. For Judge Holloway himself, the hours following his arrest were surreal. He was taken to the local police station, where he was fingerprinted and photographed like any other suspect. The irony wasn't lost on him. He, a judge who had overseen countless arraignments, was now sitting on the other side of the process. Yet through it all, he remained composed, knowing that losing his temper would only play into the officer's narrative. When he was finally allowed to make a phone call, he contacted his wife, Evelyn. Her voice trembled with worry as she listened to his account of what had happened. "Don't worry," he reassured her. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." By the time Judge Holloway was released later that day, thanks to the intervention of his legal team, the story had exploded. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read "Black Lives Matter" and "No Justice, No Peace." Reporters swarmed the area, eager to hear his side of the story. Cameras flashed as he emerged, his expression stoic but determined. Standing before the crowd, Judge Holloway addressed the nation. "What happened to me today is not unique," he said, his voice steady and strong. "It happens to black men and women every single day. The difference is, I have a platform to speak out, and I intend to use it." His words resonated deeply, igniting a firestorm of activism and advocacy. The arrest may have been intended to silence him, but instead, it amplified his voice and the voices of millions who had endured similar injustices. For Judge Marcus Holloway, this was only the beginning of a fight that would shake the foundations of systemic racism in America. The days following Judge Marcus Holloway's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions, reactions, and calls for justice. What had started as a routine trip to deliver a speech in a small Midwest town had turned into a national scandal overnight. News outlets couldn't stop talking about it. Social media was ablaze with outrage, and the people of Mapplewood found themselves at the center of a storm they hadn't anticipated. At first, the local police department tried to downplay the incident. In a brief press conference, Chief Ronald Grayson, a grizzled man with decades of experience, defended his officers, claiming they had acted according to protocol. He avoided answering questions about why a sitting judge was treated like a criminal, instead focusing on vague phrases like public safety and credible tips. "We take our duties seriously," Chief Grayson said, standing behind a podium emblazoned with the department's logo. "If someone matches the description of a suspect, we investigate. That's all there is to it." But the public wasn't buying it. Protesters began gathering outside the police station, holding signs that read *racism in blue and justice for Judge Holloway. Activists from nearby cities joined the demonstrations, turning what had been a quiet protest into a full-blown movement. Chants echoed through the streets. "No justice, no peace," and "Black Lives Matter." Meanwhile, legal experts weighed in on the case, many calling the arrest unconstitutional. Professor Angela Carter, a prominent civil rights attorney and professor at Northwestern University, appeared on several news programs to discuss the implications of the incident. "This isn't just about one bad arrest," she explained during an interview on CNN. "It's about systemic racism within law enforcement. When you see a black man in a suit and assume he's suspicious, that's not protocol. It's prejudice." The backlash grew stronger when details of the so-called tip emerged. Anonymous sources revealed that the information provided to the officers was incredibly vague. A black male wearing a suit who looked out of place. No name, no specific threat, just racial profiling disguised as police work. Critics argued that if Judge Holloway had been white, the outcome would have been vastly different. For Judge Holloway himself, the fallout was both overwhelming and empowering. Messages of support poured in from across the country. Letters, emails, phone calls. Strangers thanked him for speaking up, while colleagues expressed solidarity. Even some retired judges reached out, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and offering words of encouragement. Despite the chaos, Judge Holloway remained focused. He knew this moment was bigger than him. It wasn't just about getting an apology or punishing the officers involved. It was about exposing the cracks in the system and pushing for real change. With the help of his legal team, he began exploring his options, including filing a lawsuit against the city and the officers responsible for his wrongful arrest. The pressure mounted on the police department. Calls for accountability came not only from activists but also from elected officials. State lawmakers demanded an investigation into the department's practices, while federal agencies hinted at possible intervention. Local politicians, once silent, suddenly found their voices, condemning the arrest and urging transparency. Internally, tension simmered within the police force. Some officers privately admitted they were embarrassed by how the situation had unfolded, while others doubled down, defending their colleagues' actions. Morale plummeted as reporters camped outside the station, hounding officers for comments. One officer was caught on camera saying, "It's not our fault society doesn't trust us anymore," sparking even more criticism. As the weeks passed, Judge Holloway became a symbol of resilience. He attended rallies, gave interviews, and used every opportunity to shine a light on systemic racism. His calm demeanor and unwavering determination inspired countless others to share their stories of injustice. People who had previously stayed silent began stepping forward, recounting their own encounters with biased policing. One such person was Mia Thompson, a young black woman who had been stopped multiple times while driving through Mapplewood. "They always ask me where I'm going, like I don't belong here," she told reporters at a press conference organized by Judge Holloway's supporters. "I thought it was just me, but now I know it's part of a pattern." By the end of the month, the story had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just about Judge Holloway anymore. It was about dismantling the structures that allowed racism to thrive unchecked. For the first time in years, Meaningful conversations about reform began taking shape. Lawmakers proposed new legislation aimed at increasing accountability for law enforcement. Community leader. As the national spotlight intensified, investigative journalist Elena Morales saw an opportunity to dig deeper into the arrest of Judge Marcus Holloway. Known for her relentless pursuit of truth and knack for uncovering hidden injustices, Elena had spent years exposing corruption in small-town America. When she heard about the incident in Mapplewood, something didn't sit right with her. It wasn't just the arrest itself, it was the dismissive tone of the police department, the vague explanation of a credible tip, and the blatant racial undertones that screamed systemic bias. Elena started by reviewing the viral video footage captured at the airport. She watched it repeatedly, pausing at key moments to analyze body language and listen closely to what was said. The officers' smirks, their sarcastic remarks, and their refusal to acknowledge Judge Holloway's credentials all pointed to one thing: prejudice. But Elena knew videos alone wouldn't be enough to hold them accountable. She needed evidence, hard facts that would expose not just this incident but the larger pattern behind it. Her first step was filing public records requests for the police department's internal documents. After weeks of waiting and pushing back against bureaucratic delays, she finally received a trove of emails, reports, and disciplinary files. What she found shocked even her. The two officers involved in Judge Holloway's arrest, Officer Greg Parker and Officer Ryan Cole, had a long history of complaints filed against them, many involving allegations of racial profiling. One victim described being pulled over for no reason other than driving a nice car. Another recounted how they were handcuffed and detained during a routine traffic stop simply because they looked suspicious. But the most damning discovery came from internal communications within the department. Elena uncovered a series of emails exchanged between senior officials discussing Judge Holloway before his arrival in Mapplewood. In one particularly incriminating message, a lieutenant joked about the upcoming conference where Judge Holloway was scheduled to speak, writing, "Guess we'll see if this black judge thinks he can teach us anything." Another email mocked the idea of addressing racism in policing, calling it a liberal agenda. Elena also spoke with former employees of the Mapplewood Police Department who had witnessed misconduct firsthand. A retired dispatcher named Sarah Thompson revealed that derogatory slurs were commonly used in the station, often directed at minority groups. It wasn't just casual talk, Sarah told Elena during an interview. It was part of the culture. If you spoke up, you were labeled as trouble, so most of us stayed quiet. Armed with these revelations, Elena published a series of explosive articles in Asterisk, the Sentinel Asterisk, a respected investigative news outlet. Her expose painted a chilling picture of a police force riddled with racism and unaccountability. Headlines like Mapplewood PD, a culture of bias, and Judge Holloway arrests sparks calls for reform dominated front pages nationwide. Each article included quotes from victims, excerpts from internal documents, and statistical data showing disproportionate stops and arrests of black residents in Mapplewood. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Public outrage reached new heights as people demanded answers. Protesters marched outside City Hall, chanting slogans like "Expose the Truth," and holding signs that read "Systemic racism kills." Lawmakers called emergency sessions to discuss potential reforms, while federal agencies announced plans to investigate the department for civil rights violations. For Judge Holloway, Elena's findings validated everything he had suspected since the moment he stepped off that plane. He couldn't help but feel anger, not just toward the officers who had wrongfully arrested him, but toward the entire system that allowed such behavior to persist unchecked. Yet, amidst the fury, there was hope. The truth was finally coming to light, and with it, the possibility of real change. "I always believed in justice," Judge Holloway said during a televised interview. "But justice doesn't happen on its own. It takes courage to uncover the truth and hold people accountable. That's what Ms. Morales has done here, and I'm grateful for her work." Elena's investigation became a turning point in the case. It forced Chief Grayson to issue a public apology, though many dismissed it as insincere, and led to the temporary suspension of Officers Parker and Cole pending further review. More importantly, it galvanized communities across the country to demand transparency and accountability from their own local law enforcement agencies. As the dust began to settle, Judge Holloway realized this was more than just his fight. It was a collective struggle, a movement fueled by stories of injustice brought into the light. The evidence uncovered by investigative journalist Elena Morales gave Judge Marcus Holloway the ammunition he needed to take his case to court. With the support of a team of high-profile attorneys, including civil rights lawyer Angela Carter, Judge Holloway filed a federal lawsuit against the city of Mapplewood and the two officers involved in his wrongful arrest. The suit alleged racial profiling, false imprisonment, and abuse of power, a direct challenge not only to the individuals responsible but also to the systemic racism embedded within the police department. The decision to sue wasn't made lightly. Judge Holloway knew that stepping into the legal arena as both a plaintiff and a former arbiter of justice would put him under intense scrutiny. Critics might accuse him of seeking revenge or exploiting the situation for personal gain. But for Judge Holloway, this was never about vengeance. It was about accountability. He wanted to send a clear message. No one, not even law enforcement, was above the law. As news of the lawsuit spread, public opinion remained firmly on Judge Holloway's side. Supporters rallied behind him, organizing fundraisers to cover legal expenses and hosting marches to keep the momentum alive. Protest signs now read *Justice starts in court and hold them accountable. Even celebrities joined the cause, using their platforms to amplify Judge Holloway's story. Actress and activist Tanya Brooks tweeted, "If a judge can be treated like this, imagine what happens to those without power. Stand with Judge Holloway." On the other side, the defendants dug in their heels. Officers Greg Parker and Ryan Cole denied any wrongdoing, claiming they acted based on credible information and followed standard procedure. Their attorney, a seasoned litigator named Michael Stanton, argued that the officers had no way of knowing Judge Holloway's identity when they detained him. They were doing their jobs, Stanton insisted during a press briefing. This isn't about race, it's about protecting the community. But Stanton's defense rang hollow to many who had seen the mounting evidence against the officers. Internal emails mocking Judge Holloway before his arrival, along with their history of racial profiling complaints, painted a damning picture. For every argument Stanton made, Judge Holloway's legal team countered with irrefutable proof of bias and misconduct. The trial began 6 months after the arrest, held in a packed courtroom filled with reporters, activists, and ordinary citizens eager to witness history unfold. Judge Holloway sat stoically beside his lawyers, dressed in the same navy blue suit he'd worn on the day of his arrest, a subtle yet powerful reminder of how far he'd come since then. Across the room, officers Parker and Cole appeared uneasy, their confidence wavering under the weight of public condemnation. During opening statements, Angela Carter delivered a stirring speech that set the tone for the proceedings. This case is not just about one man, it's about exposing a system that allows racism to thrive unchecked, she declared, her voice resonating through the courtroom. Judge Holloway was humiliated because of the color of his skin. Today, we seek justice, not just for him, but for everyone who has ever been treated as less than human. The prosecution presented its case methodically, introducing evidence piece by piece. Elena Morales took the stand to recount her investigation, detailing how she uncovered the incriminating emails and disciplinary records. Former victims of the officers testified about their own experiences, describing humiliating encounters that mirrored Judge Holloway's ordeal. Each story added another layer to the narrative, painting a vivid portrait of systemic injustice. When it was time for Officer Parker to testify, tensions reached a boiling point. Under cross-examination, Angela Carter pressed him relentlessly, forcing him to admit inconsistencies in his account of the arrest. "You didn't believe Judge Holloway when he identified himself, did you?" she asked sharply. Parker hesitated before muttering, "We had to investigate further." "And why was that?" Carter shot back, "Because he's black." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, quickly silenced by the presiding judge. Parker's face turned red, but he offered no response. By the end of the trial, it was clear which side held the moral high ground. The defense's arguments felt weak and defensive, while the prosecution's case was built on undeniable truths. As closing arguments approached, Judge Holloway reflected on the journey so far. This wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a fight for dignity, equality, and the belief that change was possible. For the first time in months, he allowed himself a small flicker of hope. The verdict would determine whether the officers faced consequences, but regardless of the outcome, the battle itself had already sparked something remarkable. The courtroom was tense as the final day of the trial arrived. Months of preparation, testimonies, and evidence had led to this moment. Everyone knew the verdict would be a turning point, not just for Judge Marcus Holloway, but for the entire nation watching closely. The air felt heavy with anticipation as the jury filed back into the room after hours of deliberation. Judge Holloway sat upright in his chair, his expression calm but resolute. Beside him, Angela Carter leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on the foreman of the jury. Across the aisle, officers Greg Parker and Ryan Cole exchanged nervous glances, their earlier confidence replaced by unease. Their attorney, Michael Stanton, gripped his notepad tightly, his knuckles white. The foreman stood up, cleared his throat, and began reading the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendants, Greg Parker and Ryan Cole, guilty on all counts, including false imprisonment, racial profiling, and abuse of power." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. For a brief moment, there was silence, followed by murmurs of disbelief from the defense team and cheers from supporters seated behind Judge Holloway. Tears welled up in some people's eyes as they realized the significance of what had just happened. It wasn't just a victory for one man. It was a rare instance where the system held itself accountable. Outside the courthouse, news crews scrambled to capture reactions. Protesters who had gathered daily during the trial erupted in celebration, chanting, asterisk, "Justice serve," asterisk, and asterisk, "No more racism," asterisk. Social media lit up with hashtags like hashtag guilty verdict and hashtag Chang is coming. Journalists hailed the decision as a landmark ruling that could set a precedent for future cases involving police misconduct. For Judge Holloway, the moment was bittersweet. He stepped outside the courthouse to address the crowd, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today's verdict is not about revenge," he said. "It's about hope, for a world where no one has to endure what I went through because of the color of their skin. This is a step forward, but we still have a long way to go." The fallout from the guilty verdict sent shockwaves through Mapplewood and beyond. Chief Ronald Grayson resigned shortly after the ruling, citing personal reasons, though many believed it was due to mounting pressure. Several high-ranking officials within the police department followed suit, leaving leadership scrambling to rebuild trust with the community. Federal investigators announced plans to conduct a thorough review of the department's practices, promising reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future. Meanwhile, officers Parker and Cole faced immediate consequences. They were stripped of their badges and sentenced to prison terms, marking one of the few times in recent history that law enforcement officers were criminally convicted for actions taken while on duty. Their sentencing hearing drew national attention, with victims of police brutality sharing impact statements about how systemic racism had affected their lives. One woman, whose son had been killed during a traffic stop years earlier, spoke directly to the officers. "You thought you were untouchable, but today proves that even those in uniform are not above the law." The trial also sparked widespread discussions about accountability in policing. Lawmakers introduced new legislation aimed at increasing transparency, such as requiring body cameras for all officers and establishing independent oversight boards to investigate complaints. Cities across the country began reviewing their own department's policies, inspired by the changes unfolding in Mapplewood. For Judge Holloway, the legal battle was over, but his fight for justice continued. He traveled extensively, speaking at conferences, universities, and community events about the importance of confronting systemic racism. His story resonated deeply with audiences, especially young activists eager to make a difference. People often approached him after speeches to share their own experiences of discrimination, seeking guidance on how to effect change. One particularly memorable encounter took place at a town hall meeting in Chicago. A teenage boy named Jamal stood up hesitantly, his hands trembling as he held the microphone. "I want to do something," Jamal said softly, "but I don't know where to start." Judge Holloway smiled warmly, leaning closer to respond. "Start by telling your story," he advised. "Speak out when you see injustice, and never let anyone tell you your voice doesn't matter. Change begins with courage, and you already have that." As weeks turned into months, Judge Holloway's influence grew. He became a symbol of resilience and determination, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, it was possible to turn adversity into action. The arrest that had once humiliated him now stood as a testament to the power of perseverance. The guilty verdict against officers Greg Parker and Cole marked a historic moment in the fight against systemic racism. For decades, victims of police misconduct had watched as officers walked free, shielded by badges and institutional protections. But this time was different. The conviction sent a clear message. Accountability was possible, even for those sworn to uphold the law. In the weeks following the trial, Mapplewood became ground zero for sweeping changes. Federal investigators descended on the town, launching an extensive review of the police department's practices. Every policy, procedure, and disciplinary record was scrutinized under a microscope. What they uncovered confirmed what many already suspected. A culture of bias and impunity had festered within the ranks for years. One investigator described the findings as deeply troubling. Internal emails revealed derogatory language used casually among officers. Complaints of racial profiling were routinely dismissed without investigation. Training programs lacked any meaningful emphasis on diversity or de-escalation tactics. It was a system designed not to protect but to control, and disproportionately so for minority communities. Under mounting pressure, city officials agreed to implement sweeping reforms. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, with strict penalties for failing to activate them during interactions with the public. An independent oversight board was established, composed of community members empowered to investigate misconduct allegations. Officers now faced mandatory implicit bias training, while recruitment efforts focused on diversifying the force. For Judge Marcus Holloway, these changes were long overdue. He attended town hall meetings where residents voiced their frustrations and hopes for the future. Many shared stories similar to his of being stopped, harassed, or detained simply because of their race. Each account reinforced his belief that reform couldn't stop at Mapplewood. It needed to spread nationwide. Systemic racism isn't unique to one department, he said during a speech at a national civil rights conference. It's a disease that infects institutions across this country. And like any disease, it requires treatment, not just band-aids. His words resonated deeply, inspiring activists and lawmakers alike. In Washington, D.C., legislators introduced the Accountability in Policing Act, a bill aimed at increasing transparency and accountability in law enforcement agencies nationwide. Modeled after the reforms implemented in Mapplewood, the act proposed stricter standards for use of force policies, greater access to disciplinary records, and funding for community policing initiatives. Judge Holloway testified before Congress in support of the bill, his testimony drawing standing ovations from both sides of the aisle. Despite the progress, resistance lingered. Some officers within the Mapplewood Police Department grumbled about the new measures, claiming they made their jobs harder. Critics argued that increased oversight would lead to hesitation in critical situations. But Judge Holloway remained steadfast, reminding everyone of the human cost of unchecked power. There's no excuse for abusing authority, he told reporters during an interview. If you're afraid of being held accountable, then maybe you shouldn't wear a badge. Being a police officer is a privilege, not a right. As the months passed, signs of change began to emerge. Trust between the community and law enforcement slowly improved. Residents reported feeling safer knowing there were mechanisms in place to address grievances. Young people, inspired by Judge Holloway's courage, joined protests and advocacy groups determined to carry the torch forward. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt within Judge Holloway himself. Though he had endured humiliation and anger, he emerged stronger and more committed than ever to justice. His arrest, once a source of shame, transformed into a symbol of resilience. People looked to him not just as a victim of injustice, but as a leader in the movement for equality. One evening, as he sat in his study reflecting on the journey, his wife Evelyn entered the room holding a framed photo. It was a picture of him addressing a crowd outside the courthouse, his face filled with determination. She placed it gently on his desk. "You've done something extraordinary," she said softly. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone who feels invisible." Judge Holloway smiled, though his eyes betrayed a hint of sadness. "We've taken steps," he replied, "but we're not finished yet. Justice isn't a destination, it's a journey." And with that, he turned back to his work, drafting another speech, planning another meeting, and continuing the fight, The road ahead was still long, but he knew every step mattered. Justice had been served in Mapplewood, but the battle for true equity stretched far beyond its borders. In the years following the trial, Judge Marcus Holloway's story became a beacon of hope and resilience. What had started as a humiliating arrest in a small Midwest town evolved into a national reckoning on systemic racism and police accountability. His name was no longer just that of a respected jurist. It was now synonymous with courage, determination, and the fight for justice. For Mapplewood, the changes sparked by Judge Holloway's case were transformative. The once dismissive police department underwent a complete overhaul. Officers who resisted reform either left or adapted to the new standards. Community relations improved as residents saw tangible efforts to rebuild trust. Monthly forums were held where citizens could voice concerns directly to law enforcement leaders, fostering open dialogue and mutual understanding. Slowly but surely, Mapplewood began shedding its reputation as a place of prejudice and emerged as a model for other cities striving for change. But the impact extended far beyond one town. Across the country, Judge Holloway's story inspired countless individuals to speak out against injustice. Activists cited his case when advocating for policy reforms, while educators used it as a teaching moment in classrooms. His testimony before Congress played a pivotal role in passing the Accountability in Policing Act which brought about sweeping changes in how law enforcement operated nationwide. Police departments implemented stricter oversight measures, and training programs emphasized cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. For the first time in decades, there was measurable progress toward addressing systemic racism within institutions. Judge Holloway himself became a tireless advocate for change. He traveled extensively, speaking at universities, legal conferences, and grassroots events. His speeches were always rooted in personal experience but carried universal messages about equity, fairness, and the importance of standing up for what is right. One of his most impactful initiatives was the creation of the Holloway Justice Fund a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting victims of racial profiling and police brutality. The fund provided legal assistance, counseling, and resources to help people navigate the complexities of seeking justice. It also funded scholarships for young activists pursuing careers in law, public policy, or social work, fields crucial to creating lasting societal change. Despite his growing influence, Judge Holloway remained humble. He never sought fame or recognition. His focus was always on the cause. Friends and colleagues marveled at his unwavering dedication, even as the weight of his advocacy took its toll. Late nights poring over case files, early mornings preparing speeches, and endless meetings left little room for rest. Yet, he pressed on, driven by the belief that every effort mattered. Not everyone welcomed the changes, however. Critics accused him of being too radical, claiming his push for accountability undermined law enforcement's ability to do their jobs effectively. Some even tried to discredit him, dredging up old controversies or questioning his motives. But Judge Holloway refused to be deterred. "Criticism comes with the territory," he told an interviewer. "If I'm making people uncomfortable, then I must be doing something right." By the time he retired from the bench, Judge Holloway had cemented his legacy as a champion of justice. His memoir, titled From Handcuffs to Hope became a bestseller, offering readers an intimate look at his journey and the lessons he learned along the way. Schools named auditoriums after him, and statues honoring his contributions were erected in parks. Yet, none of these accolades meant as much to him as the stories of lives changed because of his work. Years later, during a reunion event in Mapplewood, Judge Holloway stood on the same courthouse steps where he had addressed cheering crowds after the verdict. This time, he was surrounded by families whose struggles had been eased by the reforms inspired by his case. As he looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, black and white, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "This isn't my victory," he said, his voice steady and warm. "It belongs to all of us, to those who marched, who spoke out, who refused to stay silent. Together, we've shown that change is possible. But let me remind you, this is not the end. Justice is a journey, and we must keep moving forward." As applause erupted around him, Judge Holloway allowed himself a rare smile. The road ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges, but he knew the foundation had been laid. Seeds of change had been planted, and they were growing stronger with each passing day. For Marcus Holloway, The true measure of success wasn't fame or recognition. It was knowing that he had helped pave the way for a brighter, fairer future. And that, he thought, was worth every step of the journey.